I have a few more questions from around the world.
Mm-hmm.
These two are related, and they are in terms of becoming a sotapanna, really. So, one friend asks, due to an insight that I had a year ago into not self, I take things less personally, and my aversion is rarely minimum, and when it happens it doesn't last long at all. But I can see that I am still liable to aversion. So my practice right now is holding on to that notion of non-self that I saw, and the non-ownership as the general background tone of life, or the larger container of things. How should I proceed? And this person is actually just a lay person who's living at home, very kind of relaxed lifestyle.
Right.
But beyond that, I don't know what they do.
Well, how should I proceed? It's really more of is there anything else I should do type of thing. Because what's described is fine, but the question is, so why are you asking yourself, how should I proceed? Is what you describe is not enough? Are you aware there is more to be done? Are you not sure about it? If all these questions persist, means you can't say you are beyond doubt, which means you should proceed by doing more of the same, and then investigate in what areas you can improve and you might have been lacking. So maybe you had an insight that freed you from sense of ownership to a degree, which is possible, to even people who don't necessarily commit to the practice 24/7. They could still experience non-ownership and experience release on account of it. But is there a cultivation of a suitable basis for that insight to be taken then even further? Such as, is there a sufficient virtue, accomplishment in virtue, sense restraint, seeing the signs of your mind, all those prerequisites basically for a sotapanna. People don't have the right view, not because Dhamma is some secret mystery that they still haven't figured out. It's because the things that they read and the things that they understand do not pertain deeply enough, and they don't pertain deeply enough not because of the lack of information or lack of their intelligence to understand. It's because of the lack of the sufficient basis of that morality, virtue, accomplishment, solitude, sign of the mind, guarding of the sense doors. Because if that basis is thoroughly developed, very little instruction will be necessary to understand the not-self and then cultivate it further.
It's like that idea of not-self. A person can get that idea, that theory,
sure,
but it remains a theory until you actually live in accordance with that idea.
Yeah, and even as a theory, as I said, it can have it can be theoretical to some degree, but it can have its practical side of it. But that practicality is something you don't wanna be sort of living off of it, so to speak. So if you had some like a practical release, fine. Now have 1,000 more of those. It's not about having one. I mean, the Buddha said to even the actual sotapannas, actual sakadagamis, actual anagamis, he said, did you understand the Dhamma for the sake of cherishing that view that you have, or for the sake of abandoning even that through your repetitive work and diligence until you have crossed the shore? And he says, no, it's for understanding. So then keep digging. Don't stop because you're anagami now or something. Keep digging and don't carry that raft with you when you cross the shore. That's it. It's for that purpose.
Continue that renunciation.
Exactly. So if you have it, if you've had any kind of insight of any kind, sure. Now, 1,000 times more. Repeat the same. And then when you do, just keep doing it. And keep increasing it. And you'll know when to stop.
Yeah. It's like that you get the right idea, but then it needs to root itself.
Yeah.
and you bring it into reality, you bring it into realization.
Yeah, you need to cultivate it. Yeah, you might plant the best seeds,
Yeah.
but unless you look after and clear the weeds and protect it from to becoming too dry or too wet, they're not going to germinate properly, or they will not be as good. So you have to attend to it. You have to keep doing it and keep an eye on it. So what do I do next? It's more like, how do I do more of this? Even increase the quality of what I've been doing.
But that how to do more of that, those instructions are already there.
Well,
laid
exactly.
out.
How do I do more of this means I already know how I've done this.
Yeah.
So now just do more of it. It's not a secret. It's more like on the level of diligence, work, repetition, and sticking to it. And yes, not living off on the that kind of, oh, I had this experience a year ago. It was nobody denies that people have experiences. What I deny is basically the view that you can just now assume it's finished or something because you saw it once. Yeah, but I had experience, it was real. Yeah, sure. But you also had experience of suffering millions of times and it was equally real. So which is more now? Your one experience of release, or every single time you still suffer? So there you go. That's your answer. Can you still suffer? Yes. Keep then regenerating, cultivating that experience in yourself. If it's not clear, clarify it. That's your work. If it's clear, then sustain it in its clarity, protect it, and make sure the virtue is there to match, to sustain that basis. Sense restraint, don't become careless, and keep doing it.
Yeah, you
Keep
clarifying,
polishing
the view.
It's not.
That's why I like that realization. You're bringing it into reality, so to speak. You're making it more real.
Sure. Literal meaning of exactly. Yeah.
So it's like an insight, but then you just
Well, that's what
clean
bhavana
it.
is. Yeah. Keeping it alive, bhavana, keeping it in the being, bringing it into the actuality, the being of it, sustaining it in its existence, whatever you are cultivating.
Until it takes.
Well, you'll know, as I say, when to stop. You don't stop by decision to stop. You stop when there's no more work to be done. And you don't need to decide that. That just happens.
So the other question from another friend, he or she says, I've reached a point where I can clearly see arising feelings and thoughts as not mine and simply just as a risen phenomenon. But sometimes I lapse in mindfulness. I lose the correct perspective and suffer as a result. Also, I think every time a feeling comes up, there is a self bundled with it.
Sure.
It takes about a second for me to realize it's anicca, dukkha, anatta.
That's too long.
So I'm wondering if I've reached the Sotapanna stage. If I haven't, how far do I have to go?
Right. Well, if you're wondering whether you have reached it, you haven't. Because if you need somebody else to answer it, means you don't know it for yourself.
Like you just said, once you finish the work, you know.
Exactly. It's not like, oh, I can stop now because I'm a Sotapanna. It's more like, no, it's because I'm Sotapanna, the work cannot happen anymore because there's no more work to that extent.
Right.
So then you keep looking for work and there is no more work, and then you calm down and then you realize there is no more work. That's how suttas always describe it as well. He works diligently. It's not like, oh, is this handle worn out yet? No, he just uses the handle, until he realizes it's worn out, and then it needs to be replaced. So saying a monk just purifies his mind. He doesn't worry, oh, when will I not? Will I? Am I? He just keeps doing it. Then when there's no more work to done, he just obviously has to drop it and calm down. And then when on the later occasion, when his mind calms down, as the Sutta say, he realizes, oh, the mind's free, or freer. So if you're asking if you're a Sotapanna, means you're not. That doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. Just means you have to keep doing it more until basically you are unable to suffer amidst things that are making you suffer. And then whether the whole world says you're Sotapanna or you're not a Sotapanna, it doesn't matter. You went beyond suffering to that extent. And the reason why that person cannot sustain mindfulness, or rather mindfulness lapse, and then they suffer, because they lose perspective, it's because the mind hasn't been developed enough. And you don't develop mind enough by getting more information that can help. You develop the mind by sense restraint and upgrading the virtue. So that's the work. That's why Buddha said that, if a monk keeps patimokkha, dwells restrained, moderate in eating, guards the sense doors, the mind becomes pliable as a result of that training and taming. So what he thinks, then the mind will go where he thinks it, and he will be in control of it, not the other way around. Because that person obviously doesn't want to be losing the perspective. Because when they do, they're aware suffering arises and persists. Which means, if it were up to them, the mind would not lose the perspective. So the mind doesn't listen to them. The mind loses perspective. Why can the mind do that? Is because you still give in to the choices that enable mind to have control over you, not the other way around. So the mind is not tamed enough. So whenever you can't sustain what you understood, or you lapse in, or you're getting distracted, is because you still keep choosing things rooted in greed, aversion, and delusion, and you are still acting out of distraction. So you need to upgrade the precepts, or take them a bit more seriously or tightly, and also guard the sense doors. And then, if you can't do that, then you have to accept the outcome. Then the mind will get out of your control every now and then, and you will suffer. And that suffering will be worse than somebody who is not aware of the right context. Because ignorance is bliss to a degree. That's why people do not see the suffering in sensuality and remain infatuated for the rest of their life. They pay the price later, much worse price. But somebody who is aware and who loses perspective, that suffering will be felt worse, because they are aware of it. So then the compromise of not being sufficiently restrained also then has more weight. So you realize, yeah, it is up to you, and there's no excuse. So if your mind is not in your control, it's because you haven't tamed it enough.